When my neighbor Hadley screamed for help as gunshots echoed through our quiet street, I had two choices: lock my door and wait for police, or grab my German Shepherd Knox and do something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. My name is Damon Thorne, and 3 years ago, I thought my days of running toward danger were over. I was wrong. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. It was supposed to be just another Tuesday night in our peaceful Denver suburb. I'm a single father raising my 8-year-old daughter Viviana after losing my wife to cancer 3 years ago, after serving as an Army combat medic. In Afghanistan, I came home broken, carrying invisible wounds that made me question if I'd ever be the man my daughter needed me to be. These days, I work as an EMT, trying to save lives on civilian streets instead of foreign battlefields. My neighbor. Across the street is Officer Hadley Crane, 28 years old and barely 2 years on the force. She's become like the sister I never had, always checking on Viv and me, bringing cookies after her late shifts, and reminding me that good people still exist in this world. Hadley has this way of making Viv laugh that reminds me of my wife, and honestly, she's been one of the few bright spots during the darkest period of my life. Then there's Knox, my 4-year-old German Shepherd. He's not just a pet. He's a former military working dog who served 3 tours overseas before I adopted him after my discharge. Knox suffers from his own version of PTSD, just like me. Some nights I catch him staring at the front door, ears perked, ready for threats that aren't coming. We've been healing together, 2 broken soldiers trying to figure out how to live in peace. But tonight, peace shattered in less than 10 seconds. Tonight I discovered that sometimes your past doesn't haunt you. Sometimes it prepares you for the moment when everything depends on whether you'll run toward danger or away from it. Tonight, Knox and I learned that being a hero isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and choosing to act anyway. What happened next left even seasoned police officers stunned and changed how I see everything I thought I'd lost when I came home from war. This is the story of how a single father and his damaged dog charged through gunfire to save a police officer's life, and discovered something neither of us knew we still had inside us. That Tuesday started like every other day in our quiet corner of Denver's Stapleton neighborhood. Viviana was spending the night at her grandmother's house, which meant I had the evening to myself for the first time in weeks. As a single father, those moments of solitude are rare and precious. I'd planned to catch up on some reading after dinner, maybe watch a movie that wasn't animated for once. Our street, Maple Avenue, is the kind of place where neighbors still wave to each other and kids ride bikes until the street lights come on. White picket fences, well-maintained lawns, American flags on front porches. It's exactly the kind of normal, peaceful life I dreamed about during those long nights in Afghanistan when mortars were falling and I was trying to keep soldiers alive in makeshift field hospitals. I'd moved here specifically for Viviana after Maria died. My wife had always talked about wanting to live somewhere safe, somewhere our daughter could grow up without fear. After the cancer took her, I made a promise to give Viv that life, even if I had no idea how to navigate single parenthood while carrying my own invisible wounds from the war. That evening, I was in the backyard working with Knox on his training exercises. Even 3 years after adopting him from the military working dog program, we both still needed the routine, the structure, the purpose that training provided. Knox had served 3 tours as an explosive detection dog before retiring, due to his own trauma. The Army psychiatrist told me that pairing a veteran with a veteran dog might help us both heal. She was right mostly. Knox struggles with hypervigilance just like me. He'll hear a car backfire and drop into a defensive crouch. Thunderstorms send him hiding under Viviana's bed, but he's also the reason I get up every morning, the reason I push through the nightmares and the guilt about coming home when so many of my friends didn't. We were practicing basic commands when I heard Hadley's patrol car pull into her driveway across the street. She always worked the evening shift, usually getting home around 9:30. I could see her through my back fence, and she looked exhausted. Her shoulders sagged as she gathered her gear from the trunk. Hadley moved into the house across from us about 18 months ago, right after graduating from the police academy. She's young, maybe 28. with this fierce determination to make a difference in the world. Reminds me of myself before I learned how complicated that desire can become. She's got red hair that she keeps in a tight bun and freckles that make her look younger than her age. From the beginning, she took special interest in Viv and me. Maybe she recognized the signs of a family still figuring out how to function after loss. She'd bring cookies when she noticed I'd had a particularly rough day, or offer to watch Viv when I had to work late. Last Christmas, she spent the morning with us because she said she didn't have anywhere else to go. By the end of the day, she felt like family. "Hey, Knox, look," I said, pointing toward Hadley's house. Knox's ears perked up. He'd grown to love her too, probably because she always brought him treats and never minded when he got protective of Viviana during their conversations. But something felt different that night. Hadley wasn't moving with her usual confident stride. She kept looking over her shoulder, and her radio was crackling more than usual. Knox noticed it too. His training kicked in, and he started that low growl that meant he sensed something wrong. I thought about walking over to check on her, but Hadley values her independence. She'd made it clear early on that while she appreciated our friendship, she didn't want to be seen as someone who needed rescuing. I respected that about her, even when my protective instincts wanted to make sure everyone in my small circle was safe. Instead, I finished Knox's training session and headed inside to clean up. I had no way of knowing that within the next hour, everything about our quiet, predictable life was about to change forever. I had no idea that the skills I'd been trying to forget, the training I thought I'd left behind in the desert, were about to become the difference between life and death for someone I cared about. I was washing the dinner dishes when Knox suddenly froze by the kitchen window, his ears sharp and alert. That's his tell. That split second before he goes into full military mode. 3 years of living together taught me to pay attention when Knox sensed danger, even when I couldn't see it myself. Then I heard it. Hadley's police radio crackling from her patrol car across the street, louder than usual. Her voice cut through the static, strained and urgent in a way I'd never heard before. "Dispatch, I need immediate backup at 1247 Maple Street. Armed suspect has taken a civilian hostage. Repeat, armed suspect with hostage." My blood turned cold. 1247. Maple Street was Mrs. Chen's house, just 2 blocks from where we lived. Mrs. Chen was 74 years old, lived alone, and baked the best apple pies in the neighborhood. The thought of someone threatening her made my jaw clench with an anger I hadn't felt since Afghanistan. Knox was pacing now, that low whine starting in his throat that meant his training was kicking in. He could sense my tension rising, feel the shift in energy that happened when everything went from normal to dangerous in seconds. I moved to the front window and saw Hadley rushing to her patrol car, speaking rapidly into her radio as she pulled on her tactical vest. Even from across the street, I could see her hands shaking slightly. She was scared, but she was going anyway. That's what cops do. That's what soldiers do. They go toward the danger when everyone else runs away. My EMT radio crackled to life on the kitchen counter. "All available units respond to multi-vehicle accident on I-25 northbound. Multiple casualties, ambulances, and police backup requested immediately." The timing couldn't have been worse. Every available police unit and ambulance in our district was being pulled to a freeway pileup at least 20 minutes away. Hadley was walking into a hostage situation with no backup coming anytime soon. I watched her patrol car disappear around the corner, red and blue lights flashing against the houses. Knox whined again and looked directly at me, those intelligent brown eyes asking the same question that was burning in my chest. Are we going to help her? For 3 years I'd been trying to leave the soldier behind. I'd convinced myself that I was done running toward gunfire, done making life or death decisions, done being responsible for other people's lives. I'd built a quiet, safe existence where the most dangerous thing I faced was Viviana's scraped knees and Knox's nightmares. But as I stood in my kitchen, hearing the distant sound of sirens and knowing that Hadley was facing an armed suspect alone, all of that careful distance crumbled. She wasn't just my neighbor anymore. She was family. She was the woman who helped my daughter with homework, who brought us soup when we were sick, who never missed Viviana's school plays. The first gunshot echoed through the neighborhood like thunder. Knox immediately dropped into a defensive crouch, his military training overriding 3 years of civilian life. The sound hit me like a physical blow, dragging memories of Afghanistan to the surface. I knew that sound. I knew what it meant. 2 more shots followed in rapid succession. Different weapons, different directions. My combat medic training automatically cataloged the information, analyzing the tactical situation even as my hands started shaking. Hadley's voice came over her radio again, weaker this time, desperate. "Officer down. I repeat, officer down. Suspect has moved to the backyard with the hostage." Then silence. Knox was on his feet now, pacing between me and the front door, his entire body vibrating with energy and purpose. He knew. Somehow, he understood that someone we cared about was in trouble, and every instinct we'd tried to bury was screaming at us to act. I closed my eyes and saw Viviana's face. What would happen to her if I didn't come home? But then I thought about Hadley, bleeding somewhere in the darkness, facing an armed suspect with no backup and no help coming. I thought about Mrs. Chen, terrified and trapped with a man willing to shoot a police officer. My hands stopped shaking. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something I thought I'd lost when I left the army. Purpose. The knowledge that sometimes you're the only thing standing between innocent people and violence, and you have a choice to make. Knox looked at me and barked once, sharp and clear. It wasn't a question anymore. I looked down at Knox, who was staring at me with those intense brown eyes that had seen combat in 3 war zones. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The scared single father who'd been hiding from his past disappeared, replaced by the combat medic who never left a soldier behind. "Knox, we can't leave her," I said, my voice steady for the first time in years. She'd do the same for Viv. Knox's entire body language changed. His ears perked forward, his stance widened, and that familiar focus I remembered from our military, days locked into place. He was ready. He'd been waiting for this moment as much as I had. I moved fast, muscle memory taking over. First, my tactical flashlight from the emergency kit by the front door. Then my EMT bag with trauma supplies, tourniquets, and pressure bandages. If Hadley was bleeding, I'd need them. Knox followed me to the hall closet where I kept his service harness, the one he'd worn overseas. The moment I pulled out that familiar black harness with the faded military patches, Knox transformed completely. His civilian dog demeanor vanished. This was the working dog who'd detected dozens of IEDs, who'd saved countless lives by sniffing out explosives before they could kill American soldiers. "This is like the old days, buddy," I said, fastening the harness around his chest. "We're going to help someone." Knox stood perfectly still as I adjusted the straps, his breathing controlled, his eyes alert. He understood. After 3 years of retirement, we were both going back to work. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 while heading toward the back door. The dispatcher answered on the first ring. 911, what's your emergency? "This is Damon Thorne, EMT license number 4472. I'm responding to assist Officer Crane at 1247 Maple Street. Suspect is armed, officer is down, backup is delayed. Sir, you need to stay away from that location. This is an active police situation." I'm former Army combat medic with tactical training. Officer Crane is my neighbor, and she needs medical assistance now. I'm going in. I hung up before she could argue. Knox and I slipped out the back door into the night. The 2-block route to Mrs. Chen's house would normally take 5 minutes, walking down the sidewalk. Tonight, Knox and I moved through shadows and backyards like we were back in Afghanistan, using every piece of cover available. The muscle memory was terrifying and comforting at the same time. Knox stayed close to my left side, matching my pace perfectly. His head swiveled constantly, scanning for threats, his nose working to process every scent. This was what he'd been bred and trained for. This was what we'd both been missing without realizing it. As we approached Mrs. Chen's street, I could see the red and blue lights from Hadley's patrol car painting the houses in alternating colors. The car was parked at an angle in front of the house, driver's door still open, no sign of Hadley. I crouched behind a neighbor's fence and studied the scene. Mrs. Chen's house was a small ranch-style home with a large backyard surrounded by a wooden privacy fence. The front windows were dark, but I could see the flicker of a flashlight beam moving around in the back. Knox pressed against my leg, and I felt him tense. He'd detected something, some scent or sound that his training flagged as dangerous. Trusted his instincts completely. If Knox said there was a threat, there was a threat. "Easy, boy," I whispered. "We're going to circle around back, stay low, assess the situation first." We moved along the alley behind the houses, Knox's paws silent on the asphalt. Every few steps he'd freeze and test the air, then look back at me with those intelligent eyes that seemed to say, "I've got this under control." When we reached the back of Mrs. Chen's property, I could hear voices through the wooden fence. A man's voice, angry and unstable, making demands. Mrs. Chen's voice, thin and frightened, pleading. And underneath it all, a sound that made my blood run cold, labored breathing that I recognized from too many combat zones. Someone was hurt and trying to stay quiet. Hadley, Knox, and I found a gap between fence boards where I could see into the backyard. What I saw there made my combat medic training kick into overdrive and changed everything about what I thought this rescue would require. Through the gap in the fence, I could see everything. Mrs. Chen stood frozen in the middle of her backyard, a tall man in dark clothing holding her arm with one hand and a pistol with the other. Hadley was crouched behind her patrol car near the back gate, clutching her left shoulder, blood seeping through her fingers. Her service weapon was drawn, but she couldn't get a clean shot without risking Mrs. Chen's life. The suspect was maybe 30 feet from Hadley, using Mrs. Chen as a human shield while he advanced toward the patrol car. He kept shouting the same demands over and over. "Put the gun down. Put it down, or the old lady dies. You hear me?" Hadley's voice was steady despite her injury. "Let her go. You can walk away from this. No one else has to get hurt." "Shut up. You think I'm stupid? You already called for backup." Knox pressed against my leg, and I could feel the controlled tension in his muscles. He was reading the tactical situation just like I was, calculating angles and distances. In Afghanistan, we'd done this dance dozens of times. Assess, plan, execute. I whispered the German commands we'd used overseas. "Knox, bleib, stay." His ears twitched, acknowledging the order, while his eyes remained locked on the suspect. The man was getting more agitated, waving the gun erratically. Mrs. Chen whimpered every time the barrel swung near her head. Hadley was losing blood, her grip on her weapon starting to waver. In maybe 2 minutes, she'd be too weak to maintain defensive position. I had one advantage the suspect didn't know about. Knox's specialty in Afghanistan wasn't just explosive detection. He'd been cross-trained for suspect apprehension. Military working dogs are taught to attack on command, to disable threats without killing them. Knox weighed 85 pounds, of pure muscle, and had taken down armed insurgents twice his size. Moving as quietly as possible, I worked my way along the fence until I found a loose board I could push aside. Knox slipped through the gap first, disappearing into the shadows along the back fence line. Years of training kicked in as he positioned himself behind the suspect's blind spot. I gave him 30 seconds to get into position, then picked up a piece of broken concrete from Mrs. Chen's garden and threw it toward the front of the house. It clattered against her front steps, echoing in the night. The suspect spun toward the sound, dragging Mrs. Chen with him. "What was that? Who's there?" That's when I gave Knox the command that changed everything. "Fass. Attack. 85 pounds. Of highly trained German Shepherd exploded out of the darkness like a guided missile. Knox hit the suspect low and hard, going for his gun arm exactly as he'd been trained. The impact knocked both the suspect and Mrs. Chen to the ground, but Knox's precision was perfect. He clamped down on the suspect's wrist, forcing him to drop the weapon while Mrs. Chen rolled away to safety. The suspect screamed and tried to fight Knox off, but you don't fight a military working dog and win. Knox had been trained by the best handlers in the world to maintain his grip until given a release command. I charged through the gap in the fence, covering the distance to the scattered gun in seconds. The suspect was on his back with Knox controlling, his arm unable to reach for any other weapons. "Knox, aus!" Release. Knox immediately let go and stepped back, positioning himself between the suspect and Mrs. Chen, who was crawling toward her back door. I kicked the gun away and knelt beside the suspect, who was clutching his wrist and cursing. No arterial bleeding, no permanent damage. Knox had done exactly what he'd been trained to do, neutralize the threat without causing unnecessary injury. "Don't move," I told the suspect, then rushed to Hadley. She was pale but conscious, still gripping her service weapon. "Damon? What are you doing here?" "Saving your life," I said, pulling medical supplies from my EMT bag. The bullet had gone through her shoulder, missing major arteries. Painful, but not fatal. As I applied pressure to her wound, Hadley grabbed my arm with her. "Good hand." Her voice was urgent, frightened in a way I'd never heard before. "Damon, listen to me. This wasn't just a hostage situation. He told Mrs. Chen he planted something in her basement. There's a device down there. He said it's on a timer." The blood in my veins turned to ice. This wasn't a random crime. This was terrorism, and we had just walked into the middle of a much bigger threat. The next 15 minutes felt like hours. Knox immediately went into detection mode when I told him about the device in the basement. His nose led us straight to a crude but deadly explosive rigged to a timer, showing less than 8 minutes remaining. Mrs. Chen had been living above enough explosives to level 3 houses on either side of hers. When the bomb squad arrived, they couldn't believe what they found. Sergeant Martinez, a 20-year veteran, told me later that without Knox's precise location work, they never would have found and disarmed the device in time. The suspect had hidden it behind the water heater in a crawl space no human could have accessed quickly enough. 4 minutes and 37 seconds. That's how much time was left on the timer when they cut the final wire. The ambulance took Hadley to Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital, where surgeons repaired the damage to her shoulder. She'd have full mobility back within 6 months, they said. Mrs. Chen was treated for shock and minor bruises, but insisted on staying in her own home that night, surrounded by family who drove in from across the city. 3 weeks later, I stood in the downtown convention center wearing a suit that felt foreign after years of EMT uniforms and casual clothes. Viviana sat in the front row wearing her best dress, beaming with pride as Police Chief Rodriguez approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today to recognize extraordinary courage under fire. Damon Thorne and his partner Knox didn't just save the life of Officer Hadley Crane that night. Their actions prevented what could have been the deadliest domestic terrorism attack in Denver's history." The medal felt heavy in my hands, but not as heavy as the realization that everything I'd been running from had led me exactly where I needed to be. Knox sat perfectly at attention beside me, wearing his military decorations for the first time since Afghanistan. The crowd gave us a standing ovation that lasted 5 full minutes. But the real recognition came later, in the hospital room where Hadley was recovering. Her arm was in a sling, but her smile was brighter than I'd seen in months. "You know what the hardest part was?" she asked me. "Not the getting shot, not the fear of dying. It was knowing that if something happened to me, there'd be no one to check on you and Viv anymore." That's when I understood what family really means. It's not just blood relation or marriage certificates. It's the people who show up when everything falls apart, who worry about you when they're the ones bleeding, who become part of your story without asking for anything in return. Hadley came home from the hospital to find her driveway full of casseroles and flowers from neighbors she'd barely met. Mrs. Chen had organized the entire street to make sure she had everything she needed during recovery. The community that had always existed quietly around us suddenly became visible, connected by one night when ordinary people did extraordinary things. Knox's transformation was the most remarkable. The hypervigilance that had plagued him for 3 years disappeared almost overnight. Having a purpose again, using his training to save lives instead of reliving old trauma, healed something fundamental in him. He still sleeps by Viviana's bed, but now it's protectiveness instead of anxiety. 6 months later, the police department offered me a position as a tactical medic with their special response team. I accepted, but only part-time. Viviana still needs her father home for homework help and bedtime stories, and I've learned that being a hero doesn't mean choosing between family and service. Sometimes it means finding a way to do both. Knox comes with me to every training session. The younger officers love working with a dog who has actual combat experience, and Knox loves having a job that matters. We've become the team I never knew we were meant to be. Last month, Viviana asked me if I missed being in the Army. I told her the truth. I don't miss the war, but I'm grateful for the training that let me save people I love when it mattered most. Sometimes the hardest chapters of your life aren't punishments. Sometimes they're preparation for the moment when everything depends on who you've become because of what you've survived. Knox and I learned that being broken doesn't mean being useless. Sometimes it just means being ready.